Okay, so we are now on to the next part of our lab assignment. Barking the dog. Um, Come on, you. Okay, so we've done part one. Now we need to configure multi-area OSPF. The third part of this, inter-area summary routes, is down here. Interesting. It also has me doing some MD5 authentication. I'll see if we actually need to do that. So yeah, I've got some message digest keys. Um, this stuff right here, this is actually setting up MD5 authentication. This doesn't work. Um, MD5 authentication. Um, Let me look at my instructions right quick to see if that's really necessary. So you've got your routing statements. Oh, and yes, we are going to do this. We talked about this, touched on this briefly in the OSPF lecture videos. Let me check something right quick. It is possible that this is something which you might need to know how to do, or at least do in the labs, that isn't exactly in the portable command guide. So let me check this for just a minute. If this is not in the portable command guide, guess what? That's what this journal section at the back of the book is about. If you learn something, or if you learn a procedure that's not explicitly written out in the book, and you want to make sure it is explicitly in your book, feel free to write it down. For example, one of the things that is in CCNA 4 is IPSLA, and I've got it right here. I know it's backwards, and also my handwriting is terrible, but trust me, I've got stuff about the IPSSH configuration here, IPSLA, things like that. So let's look again at OSPF, which is chapter 15, page 139. And the dog is trying to help me read my book. Let's see. Reference bandwidth, loopback interfaces. Okay, there is stuff in the book about inter-area route summarization, which we will need. But I don't think it actually covers MD5 authentication. So that's cool. This is something you can add to the back of your book. This Area 0 authentication message digest. Basically, what you're doing with that command is you tell it what kind of authentication to use, MD5 or SHA. And then on the interface itself, you set up your message digest key and its type and the value. And you'll expect these devices to share a key, as it were. So step one, I'm going to make sure that all these routers have got the right areas. Okay, you have to go down now. I'm sorry. You have to go down. Okay, you gotta go down. You gotta go down. Gotta go down. Yes. Okay, so let's start with router 1, obviously. And the first thing I'm actually going to do is set up this default route on router 1. So Cisco class enable class config t, and I'm going to drop in my quad 0 route. Now it's gonna say that default route without gateway, if not point-to-point interface, may impact performance. Guess what? It's a loopback. This doesn't matter. So the next thing I'm going to do is set up my OSPF like this. So what I am going to do, paste. Notice, I create the OSPF routing process. I give it a router ID. I add my areas. Notice my /24s have a 000255 mask, area 1. my link between router 1 and router 2 has a mask of O.O.O.3. Now, this default information originate command, this is the same command you'll use with RIP. The open standards use the default information originate command. EIGRP uses redistribute static to do the same kind of thing. So what this will do when I bring router 2 into the mix, one of the first things you'll see the external route propagate to router 2. So let's do that next. So with router 2, and I'm also setting some of my interfaces passive. So I set up my router. I give it a router ID. You should always do that. Notice it has just found its neighbor adjacency. I gave it these networks. It gave it a neighbor adjacency. Now, let's do show IP route. Notice I've got a gateway of last resort, and I want to look at that properly, shall we? Notice this code down here, O star E2. That tells me it's an external route. The star tells me that it thinks it might be a gateway. The O tells me it is OSPF. Notice that these are OSPF intra-area routes. OSPF IA, inter-area routes. So if you just see the O, that's an intra-area route. So, and that's actually what we'll see going from router 2 to router 3. So let's go to router 3 now, and we'll see a slightly, and actually just for giggles, let's look at the routing table. Okay, do show. So this is what our routing table looks like to router 1. This is what our routing table looks on router 2. So I've got some inter-area routes. I've got my static default route going to my loopback. My static default route going from to my loopback from the perspective of router 2 is an external route, because it's coming in from a static route. A static route is by definition external to any dynamic routing process. This would also be true if that gateway was some other kind of route, a RIP or EIGRP or BGP. They would all qualify as external to the OSPF process, the OSPF routing domain. So, come on, you. So I'm going to take router OSPF. Okay, so I'm going to do all of this. Paste. Boom. And give it a minute, and it will form its it should form its adjacencies. There we go. So do show IP route. Okay. It formed the neighbor adjacency with 2. Okay, there we go. I just wasn't being patient. So we have an internal route, so to speak, in area 3, between router 1 and router 2 here, between router 3 and router 2. We have an intra-area route coming from 3 through 2 about areas 0 and area 1. That's where these are coming from. And then finally we have our external routes. So we've got lots of possibilities here. So, now we've got our basic routing set up. Now we can start to make it more interesting. Set up your authentication, etc. So next step is now I guess really and truly, if I wanted to make, and you really should try to make sure that this is all actually working. for it to be sort of working before you move on is not a good idea. So let's do ping, and I'm going to look at my addressing table for just a second. Let's see one of those loopbacks on router 1. Okay, let's go whole hog with this. Let's ping from router 3 to that loopback. .165.200.225. Bam. Okay. Okay. I can ping 1.1. Now I'm going to go over to router 3 and make sure I can do the other side. Ping 4.1 and 5.1. Okay. 192.168.4.1. Okay, so I have acid tested this. I can ping all the way across the topology from both sides. So now I'm good and ready to. Now, one thing that we might observe as we set up this authentication is that we will break the topology. The neighbor adjacencies will break until the authentication is set up correctly on both sides. So let's do, go back to, okay, yes. Let's go to router 1. If we do copy, I'm going to go to end, paste, boom. I'm going to wait a minute. Actually, show people. Okay, it doesn't like interface brief. Notice our timers are, our hold time is a 10. I've ticked down past that, and the neighbor adjacency is there, gone. We would have observed the same thing on router 2. But, so let's go to router 2 and put this back. So it broke, so it's still got a neighbor adjacency with 3 and doesn't have one with 1. We're about to flip that script. And paste. Boom. So I've set up my authentication type for area 0, MD5. My authentication type for area 3, MD5. The neighbor adjacency for 1 has formed. And actually, let's watch this. So my neighbor adjacency for 1 has formed, and my neighbor adjacency with 3 has broken. So let's do the last step of this. Go to router 3 on copy. Now, let's make sure that my areas are right. Now, technically speaking, I might have these backwards, but I'm using the same key on both sides. Now, if you do this, make sure that if you're using different keys in different areas, you get those right. If you're using different authentication types in different areas, get that right too. So I've lost 2, but I'm going to put it back. And we can watch the neighbor adjacency form. Good. So my last step, and that'll be the next video, is to get my inter-area summary routes set up. And we need to talk about that a little before I do it. So hold on, I'll be right back.